Thank you. So this is NAJC, National Association of Japanese Canadians. My name is Lorene Oikawa, and I am the president of the National Association of Japanese Canadians. And we are just thrilled to have a session and welcome you, NAJC Chats with Michael Abe. I am currently sitting in Coast Salish territory. I live in the city of Surrey, for those of you that might not know it, which is part of Metro Vancouver. And it is the traditional and unceded territories of the Semiahmoo, Katsi, Coquitlam, Kwantlen, Kikite, and Tawasin First Nations. So very proud to live here and acknowledge First Nations.
And we are on the Algonquin speaking lands of the Esquimalt and Songhees.
Yes.
People, so.
Thank you. And I know, oh, we still have more people joining us. This is great. So excited. I know that all of you from, well, I think we have somebody, I was gonna say from Canada, but it's not just Canada, there's somebody from Japan. So wherever, whether it's US, Canada, or Japan that you're joining us, we're grateful that you're joining us, and we know that you also appreciate First Peoples Land, Turtle Island. So as I said, I'm very excited. I'll just keep letting people in. So much excitement here. Very excited to have Michael Abe. Michael is a Sansei, which is a third generation Japanese Canadian. He's the project manager for Landscapes of Injustice. He's going to tell you more about that. He's worked in the tourism industry for 20 years prior to being involved with the Landscapes of Injustice. He is the past president of the Victoria Nikkei Cultural Society, and I think that's how I first met him. And he recently started up a heritage subcommittee with his daughter Natsuki. His hobbies include golf, martial arts, I've seen photos on Facebook, shuji, and sumie. And he just started reading Japanese books, which is really amazing because I'm Yonsei and I'm just learning basic hiragana on Duolingo. So I'm not at the stage where I can read Japanese that well. So welcome, Michael Abe. Oh, and I should just point out, Mike is going to do a presentation. He's going to also engage with some Japanese Canadian representatives. And once he finishes that, then we will, depending on time, then we'll have some questions. So hold your thought, make note of your questions, and then I'll let you know and I'll keep track of all of that. So thank you. I'm just going to let you share your screen.
Oh.
And for any of you that have any family or friends that say, oh, darn, I wanted to attend the session, then please let them know we are doing another session on Sunday. It's 4 p.m. Pacific time, 5 p.m. Alberta, 6 p.m. Manitoba, 7 p.m. Toronto time. So this coming Sunday, May 31st. And you can go to the najc.ca website and sign up.
Well, the beginning will be basically the same, but we'll have different guest speakers in the second half. So thanks very much, Lorene, and thank you everyone for joining us. Lots of familiar faces out there, so thank you. I'm just going to do a brief overview of our project and our outputs update, and then get into the presentation, a sneak peek of our digital archives. So Landscapes of Injustice, we're a 7-year research project based at the Department of History at the University of Victoria, with a project office at the Center for Asia Pacific Initiatives. It's funded by the Social Science and Humanities Research Council of Canada and 14 other partners who are, 14 other partners, just looking for my button there. And we are in our final year we've been given a bit of an extension as well though. We have partners from across Canada, including universities, museums, Japanese Canadian organizations, and historical associations, as well as the Library and Archives Canada in Ottawa. With this being our final year, we're excited to present all of the final outputs. First up will be a new book, scheduled to be released in August. It emerges from the collective effort to observe from a new perspective Canada's 1940s experiment in the mass uprooting, internment, dispossession, and exile of people on the basis of race. This perspective centers on the dispossession by theft, vandalism, neglect, and forced sale of the property of Japanese Canadians. It consists of 14 chapters with 11 different authors, including a poignant trip down memory lane in the chapter Road to Redress with Art Miki and Audrey Kobayashi. As our project director, Jordan Stanger-Ross, puts it, our research collective believes that seeing the internment era from a perspective centered on the dispossession forces reconsiderations of its origins, unfolding, and legacies in some of its historical significance. This book, as well as all of the other public outputs, is based on 4 claims that the collective has distilled from the research findings. They are: 1, loss of home; 2, that it required the complicity of thousands; 3, it required reasoning wrong; and finally, 4, dispossession is permanent. So you might be following our series of stories and articles, 10 so far, I believe, illustrating these claims in the Nikkei Voice and bulletins. So our current phase, phase 2, focuses on disseminating these research findings: the traveling museum exhibit, interactive digital interfaces, archival database, and developing teacher resources. We are planning to have a museum exhibit and book launch event on Saturday, September 26th, to coincide with the release of all of our outputs. It might have a different format that we originally planned, but we are very hopeful to stick to this schedule. The narrative website will present the research materials in a storytelling format. Designed in an international competition, it will soon be developed into a full-fledged website with the goal to launch at the September event. Elementary and secondary teacher resource websites are also being developed in tandem with the narrative website. Having been successfully piloted and tested in over 30 rooms in BC and Ontario, the interactive and engaging elementary school modules will be disseminated through training materials on this interactive digital platform, as well as through other project activities. A highly successful output for the project was the Canada's Internment Era Field School that incorporated the Nikkei National Museum's bus tour last July. It was an opportunity for 10 teachers and 10 students to interact and learn from those who had experienced internment and the forced uprooting in sites where it took place. Although this year's field school has been postponed to next summer, the 13 successful teacher applicants from across Canada, as far as Halifax, will take part in an online class this summer in preparation for next year's field school. Last year, special friendships and connections were made. And for me and my daughter, it was a time of discovery. The most prominent output will be the traveling museum exhibit that will follow the stories of featured family lives through the themes of the 4 claims. It's being developed by museum professionals at the Royal BC Museum and the Nikkei National Museum, along with our curatorial museum postdoc, Yasmin Railton. Each design feature draws on rich archival resources using new research and never before seen artifacts to convey an authentic telling of the history of the dispossession of Japanese Canadians, featuring families like the Morishtas and the Ebisuzaki store. The entire machine of the mass uprooting and dispossession of an entire community required tremendous resources to generate the bureaucracy represented in the project research findings. Notwithstanding any changes due to COVID-19, our plans remain for the exhibit to tour nationally, beginning at the Nikkei National Museum and Cultural Center in Burnaby, to the Canadian Museum of Immigration, Pier 21 in Halifax, to the Japanese Canadian Cultural Center in Toronto, and finishing at the Royal British Columbia Museum in Victoria in 2022. The exhibit will be displayed across the country, engaging a general audience as well as Japanese Canadian community members in critical examination of the legacy of these events and their relation to the future of diversity, marginalization, and democratic citizenship of Canada, in Canada. It will enable wide public access to this history, engage audiences of all ages across Canada, raise critical consciousness of this important era in Canadian history and heritage, and promote dialogue on racism and diversity. And this brings us to the digital archive output that will be the focus of tonight's presentation. For our community members, certainly for me, I think that this might be the most impactful and exciting output of the project. Taking the hundreds of thousands of digitized pages, we are working with the Humanities Computing and Media Center at UVic to develop a user-friendly database that will help researchers and community members more easily access these documents. We are grateful to Library and Archives Canada, one of our project partners, for digitizing the 15,000 case files. This summer, our research assistants are keeping very busy, adding metadata and preparing these files to be added to the database. The end goal is that all of the research documents acquired during the course of the project can be searched and retrieved on a single interface. So here's a sneak peek of what's in there. And please note that there will be a snazzier interface and proper navigation and other features consistent with the design elements of the other outputs being completed. So through the magic of TV, let's just do a live search on Laureen's uncle, Tatsuo Buck Suzuki. So we go on to the interface. Again, this is a very utilitarian view of the interface. So we go on to search, and then we search landscapes of injustice, and then we type in a name. We'll put in Buck Suzuki and click on search. And up comes 118 documents, but they also include other Suzukis and other Bucks. So we're looking for Tatsuro or Buck Suzuki. The score there refers to how many times the search name comes up in these documents under each heading. So there are several archived oral histories from the British Columbia Archive collection here. And if we click into these results, they reveal information about the interview and a link to the audio of the interview itself. We find several interviews of Buck Suzuki in there. And then going back, we also find entries where Buck has been mentioned in an oral history, oral history interview. And in this case, Leslie Barnell. So we click on there and you'll see the whole transcript. And in this recent interview by Caitlin Finley with Leslie Barnell, granddaughter of Frank Shears, she discusses a series of protest letters from Buck and the responses from her grandfather. This was after talking about the varied degrees of acceptance various family members had on what their grandfather did at the time. So if you go to the right there, you can click on media and you can get the audio of the interview. So going back to the results page, we also see a series of entries with the protest letters. So we click on this entry and the transcript comes up along with a media link. And so when you click on that media link, you get the typed out document of the letter. So going back here, one of the first collections to be digitized were the ledger entries for the Fishing Boat Disposal Committee, There were over 1,300 of these records. And here's a record of Tatsuro's boat, Ever Ready. So you click on that and you can see all the information appear in this entry and a link to the media. And when you click on that, you find the digitized copy of the boat record for the Ever Ready. You can see that it was valued at $1,100. The hull was built just 4 years ago. It was sold for $725 on March 12, 1942. Registered owner, Tatsuro Suzuki. And then the next entry we have, he's in here a lot, great example. This result points to the transcripts of the Bird Commission case file for Tatsuro. So a little bit of background on the Bird Commission. So the Royal Commission on Japanese Claims, known as the Bird Commission for Justice Henry Bird, ran between 1947 and 1950 as support for Japanese Canadians to investigate the forced sale of the property grew. For Cabinet, it served as a way to demonstrate the government's accountability. But the terms of reference for which a person could contest the sale of their property if they thought they were sold for less than fair market value were very narrow and restrictive, and prevented many people who had lost property from submitting claims. Thus, there are only 1,400 Bird Commission files. But the records are useful and very interesting. They provide a glimpse into the arrangements the claimants made for their property. It gave a perspective on what they claimed in 1947, including evidence like detailed lists of inventory, farm appraisal reports, diagrams of property and boundaries, layouts, and correspondence. And it gave evidence of how they argued their case for compensation to the Commission, even within the restricted terms. And here we see page 1 of the claim summary on the left. And on the right, the title page for the file, which indicates how much, if anything, was paid to the claimant. Taking a closer look at this. So in this case, Buck estimated his land to be worth $1,071, his buildings $4,700, and after some adjustments, a total value of $5,000. He had received $1,931 when the custodian sold his property, leaving him with a loss of $3,069. And on the right, we see that he was awarded $1,827.74, far better than other claims that I've seen. So, and as I mentioned, the Library and Archives Canada has digitized the almost 15,000 case files of the Office of the Custodian for use in the database. These can be requested directly from Ottawa, but soon they will be much easier and faster to access. So virtually all Japanese Canadians with some family history during the internment era should be able to find some kind of document related to their family. So here's the case file 11499 for Tatsuro Buck Suzuki. It begins with general information about the individual, address, registration number, the file number up in the right-hand corner, his age, his occupation, statement of all real property, insurance, other real property, personal property, and whether they had insurance on the property. Oftentimes you'll see life insurance and victory bonds, war bonds, war certificates here. And often people can find the addresses prior, during, and after the uprooting for their relatives. So from New Westminster, he went to Toronto in this case. And 430 Cordoba Street before that, perhaps. Detailed property summaries contain a great deal of information about the individual situation, and sometimes photos, this being in quite good shape, of homes and buildings can be found. So many people are excited to see handwritten letters and or signatures of their ancestors. Here's the beautiful script of Tatsuro, the style and the body of the letter matching that of his signature. And here we see a copy of the actual handwritten protest letter pages that we saw earlier in the presentation. And here's the last page of his letter. I can obtain, I think, from the builder of my house, a statement saying that to build a house like mine would cost between $4,000 and $4,500. Mr. Shears, I'm not blaming you personally, but I wish to go on record as being very dissatisfied with the sale price of my property as negotiated by your office. I would be very grateful for either a personal or official letter from you. Continuing in my trust, I am sincerely yours, Tatsuro Suzuki. When I first read that, I just wrote it down, and then when I read it for the first time, man, it was kind of moving that seeing it in print or in writing. So anyway, that concludes my presentation. Just to give you a sort of a snapshot of what's to come in September or hopefully September or before that, where you can go to this website and just start putting your name in rather than having to send off requests to Ottawa for your case files. But it's also good because you have different, you'll have documents from different archives. We have documents from about 20 different archives and repositories from throughout Canada and from the UK. And so what this webinar or this chat came about because I was catching up on sending out requests from people I've talked to and met over at some of our public our public outreach programs and at the Powell Street Festival, etc. And then I started to get some very amazing responses. I think I saw Gail out there. If you don't mind me reading this, I got an email from Gail Koyanagi saying, reading the proceedings from the Japanese property claims hearing was chilling for several reasons. Since I'd never met both my grandfathers, it was the first time I'd heard my grandpa Endo's voice, though mediated through the interpreter and the print. It filled me with such anger to experience even secondhand, even after so many years, the disrespectful, unjustified way our people were treated. Reading about it in this way was an incredibly powerful experience. Just wondering if the Nikkei Heritage Museum has any plans to do some kind of installation of this information. I think it would be particularly topical and relevant with regard to the current increase in reported incidents of racism and violence towards Asian Americans and Canadians. And again, thank you for the opportunity to connect in a unique way with past family members, and all the best. So I reached out to a number of people and I got a really great response. And basically asked them four questions. what did you know already about your family history? Upon receiving family files, what were your or your relatives' initial reactions? Were you able to learn more about your family history, i.e. confirm facts or learn new facts? And if so, can you give us some examples? And any comments about your experience? So I'd like to start by asking our host, Laureen, if she would be willing to share her experience with her files.
Actually, I'm feeling overwhelmed right now because this is the first time that I've seen the documents about my Uncle Buck Suzuki. I didn't realize he had such beautiful handwriting too.
I
And
know, it's
way
amazing.
with words, it's like, ooh, puts me to shame. So thank you, Mike. It's thrilling that like I have two hats, where as president of the National Association of Japanese Canadians, being a partner with the Landscapes of Injustice and being the vice chair of the steering committee for this project is just an honor and a thrill in itself, but also to be connected as I mentioned, a fourth generation Japanese Canadian, to know all this good work, and not just me, but all the Japanese Canadian community, the descendants, are going to be able to access this information. I knew a bit about my mother's side, which is the Doi family. It's four brothers that came from Hiroshima in the 1800s, went to the US. Two of the brothers, not quite sure why, they didn't like the US, but anyway, they were lured by the Colbert and Dunsmuir in Cumberland, and lured them up to Cumberland for really hard and horrible and dangerous work for less pay. But nonetheless, they came up and fell in love with Cumberland and established their families there. And then further with my family, then I discovered the story of my grandfather, who loved baseball, which I knew this growing up. He always talked about baseball, but I didn't realize too late, actually, after he had died, I found out that he was part of the Vancouver Sahi baseball team. So I did know that information, and I was very fortunate when my mother was alive that we got to receive the BC Sports Hall of Fame medal for him. So that information, and then also my mom's cousin was one of the 1942 UBC students who was kicked out because they were Japanese Canadian. So Ted Harada, who lived in Toronto. So I knew that and actually participated in part of those campaigns initiatives. And I also just knew personally that my grandmother, although I appreciated her at the time, now I'm so regretful that I didn't film her cooking. And she, it was so amazing. New Year's Day. So we're typical Japanese Canadians eating different food. My mom was a good cook, but New Year's Day was Japanese food. My grandmother would make everything, right? The chicken teriyaki, the salmon teriyaki. She'd make the mochi, the manju, the baked manju, the steamed manju. She made her own tofu from scratch, fish cake from scratch. She made all these dishes. And there I am last year struggling to make one thing, mochi. And I don't have a mochi maker, so I found out you could use your KitchenAid mixer. I was exhausted, and I only made one thing. And now I think of my grandmother, who not only cooked, she could sew, she made her own patterns, she gardened,
Yeah,
she did
very
all this
amazing.
amazing work. So I knew that kind of history, Cumberland, that kind of history. And then my father's side, Oikawa side, I knew my Uncle Buck because of his connection in the fishing community, and then also his early environmental work. But I also knew the story of the Suyan Maru and the Oikawa and other families coming in 1906 and then settling on Oikawa Island, which is in the Fraser River. And there was a big celebration, 100th anniversary. So I knew that kind of background.
And your story just happens to be in the latest issue of the Nikkei Voice.
Yes, yes.
So
Thank you. So you can learn more about that. So I'll now go into the questions, which was, so one of the things that struck me was there's this is for the Doi family, Cumberland. And so it's so devoid of any feeling of the family. It lists some of the what they viewed, I guess, the government viewed as worthy of listing. But I think of my mom, who was a little girl, and when they were being taken away, and she didn't understand why she had to leave her friends, and particularly she loved dolls. So apparently she had this collection of dolls, and that was so precious to her. And of course it's not listed, it's not considered an asset, I guess. But one thing that struck me about this list was just down under number 2, just 1, 2, 3, 4, fifth from the bottom, it says sheep wool. And then that, when I saw that, it struck me. My mom said, so I mentioned my grandmother, she was so Obacha, and she was so great at sewing. She made her own futon. And I remember my mom saying that grandma had this wool. She wasn't sure where she got it, but she would make futon. So that struck me as all of a sudden a connection to my grandmother. So that was one thing. And then there's a letter that was sent to my grandfather from the government, saying that he had $29.07, and that the government redeemed his war savings certificates. So that was that whole effort, right? During the war, be a loyal Canadian, buy these war savings, support the war effort. So here's Japanese Canadians supporting the war effort. What do they get for it? Slap in the face. They're dispossessed, they're interned, uprooted from their homes. And then this letter, and it struck me. It got me angry, because so you have $29.07, and because the government agent, Mr. Matt Brown, redeemed it, he gets $8.76 for fees or something of the $29. It was really hard, because I know Mike's question was, when, what did your family think? Well, this letter kind of just tore me. It was upsetting. I actually haven't shared any of these documents with any family members, because it was so upsetting that I thought, I can't look at this anymore. So that was one thing that I think we all struggle with, because particularly for those of us that weren't, we weren't born there. So it's almost like this survivor's guilt, knowing about what your family went through. And as Mike was reading the email from the other woman about the disrespect, and yeah, so that's what really struck me. I just really couldn't get into the other letters. The other
Just on
thing,
that, Laureen, when we did discuss, because this was supposed to be a live, we were going to do this as a workshop on our September 26th and have community members come in. But we did talk specifically about, we should have measures in place. We should have counselors in case there's trauma. And I can see that.
I think that's a great idea, because when I was with the Greater Vancouver Japanese Canadian Citizens Association, we did this amazing conference called Honoring Our People, and it was about sharing stories, and we made sure that we did have psychologists, counselors there. But I can see it. So even though, I'm dealing with history in my volunteer work on the National Association Japanese Canadian, but this is so emotional. So I must say, tears came to my eyes. I was upset, and I couldn't share it with the family at that point. I wasn't ready. It was just too upsetting. So I yes, definitely offer those supports, because lots of people haven't, well, especially when you've never really seen the detail of this, how people were treated. And then you see the specifics about the money, what little money, and yet they're taking, the money's taken away from them. But one thing I do want to thank the Landscapes and Justice and Mike for connecting me with these documents. And it's made me where I want to go from here is, yes, I will share it with the family. And then the other thing is, I want to, there's been a lot of work done on the dispossession and where things went, like fishing boats. So for the Oikawa family being fishers and boat builders, that's when I have the time, I'm going to be looking more into that and finding out what happened to the Oikawa fishing boats. So thank you for this opportunity.
Okay, thank you very much for sharing. Up next is Laura Saimoto out there.
Yeah.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay, great. Hi, everybody. I'm Laura from Vancouver. I see a lot of familiar faces, so happy to see you again. I know a lot of facts about my family, and we talked about it in our own family, but this was a very emotional experience for me. So I'm just going to say what I got out of this. I didn't know my grandfather in person because he died before I was born. And so just reading the files, I had a heads up from Sherry at the museum that this would be quite emotional. So I took a morning off to do it. And it was like over 300 pages of both our families on my mother and father's side. And I just took the morning off and read through all the documents at one time. And really, like, tears were streaming down my face the whole time. It was really a journey to get to know my grandfather. I knew what he'd gone through, but I hadn't actually felt it. So I think that what can you learn from a person with this kind of detail? And I think my takeaways are the extent of their loss, their material loss. I really felt that because it was so concrete. We have photos of my grandfather's fishing boats and his house and his car, but to see the value of in concrete numbers was quite astounding, actually. And so in that sense, like, it was a very moving thing because I could actually feel what my grandfather was feeling at the time. And the other main takeout, I think, that I got from this was because my grandfather, it was a revelation to know that he had stood up and was part of the Bird Commission to appeal the loss that they'd suffered. So what I learned about him was that like, the key takeout was really like the value that they felt they had, because when you read these documents, they're so detailed that you realize that like my family had their act together. Like, they had insurance, they had the valuations done, they had everything, like all the documentation, it was done. And you realize, like, wow, like they knew the system, and they didn't, and they valued what they had built up. And the government knew that value. It's written there right on in the numbers. So I guess what really is, like, I took out from reading all of the Bird Commission documents especially was like, they had great value of themselves and what they had built up before the war. And that was translated through the numbers of the values of their material possessions, but I felt the value of their personal dignity. And that to me was something I'd never felt. So, and the fact that, you know, that kind of value, like one of my grandfather's boats was valued, the largest one, which the government used to round up the other smaller boats, that was valued at $18,000, and it was insured for $18,000, and he got about $6,000. It was sold for $6,000. But you know what? Like, after the war, they appealed, and even their appeal is done in a very thorough and methodical way, showing what their value is. And the fact that they did that really showed me that, you know, despite what people can, you know, like what pain they may cause you, that if you value yourself and take time to, you know, really express that value to others, like, no matter that, you know, the Bird Commission, nothing really came of that. That showed to me the incredible, like, depth of, like, integrity of my grandfather. So even to the point of valuing, like, the depreciation on, like, the boat of, leasing it out to the military when they had to charter it to round up the other boats. I mean, this is the detail to which they knew their value. So they knew their stuff. And I feel that's like expresses to me what they felt about themselves. So in that sense, I really felt such a great gift from the documents, because I was able to feel the strength of that generation actually in a real way, like cellularly. So that's my sharing.
Thank you so much. Yeah, really appreciate that.
Yeah.
We have time for two more, I think. Kayla Isomura, and then Patty. Kayla, you there? Maybe not. Okay, well, why don't we jump over to Patty, and then if Kayla is there, or if she's not there, I'll show some of her, some things from her.
I don't see Kayla.
Okay. I hadn't heard from her
Okay.
confirming, so anyways, it might work out for time-wise. Patty Kagawa, are you there? I thought I saw you earlier. I saw your cool house.
Patty is here. So Patty, if you move your cursor to the bottom left, there's a little microphone with a red line on it. If you click it, it will unmute you.
I've already unmuted.
Oh, there you go.
Hi.
Thank you.
Oh, there's my book.
There's your book.
So
Thank you. I read it.
You're kidding. Wow.
Well, I sped read it.
Yeah. When I was growing up, can you guys see me? Or do I put myself? Anyway, that's okay. When I was growing up, my mom was always very open about what had happened to her family during evacuation, because she was about 17 or 18, and it really affected her and her parents, and they had worked very hard to succeed in Canada, and then having taken it all away during the war. So I knew a lot about them. And my dad, here I'm getting emotional too, as a veteran of World War II, he felt happy to have made the decisions he did to volunteer to serve Canada in the Army, which led to the opportunity to go to university, which led to a healthy career. He also kept a journal of many sections of his life, including road camp and the war experience. And so this led me to interview my parents when in 97, about that. And so eventually I transcribed the tapes. And I was wondering if you guys or someone could want those tapes, because I still have the actual tapes, right? Anyway, then it became, then it became this book. So I knew quite a bit about all of that, what had happened, and to my family and stuff. But answering the questions, so when I did share it to my cousins, like right away, all those files, and we didn't have tons of files, but there wasn't the Bird Commission or anything. But anyway, it was very interesting to read and to see. And see on that one, for example, it shows that, you know, something was sold for auction, and then they had a fee for the auctioneer, and then they had a fee for advertising, then they had a fee for moving. So in the end, you know, after all these fees, you get not much left, right? So that was kind of interesting. And yeah, there was lots of facts that were confirmed, and there was a letter from my dad to the custodian, and he was talking about his table tennis trophy that he was very proud of this trophy. He had won in Vancouver for the Japanese Canadian Table Tennis Association or whatever. Anyway, they found it. It was stored, and they shipped it to London where he was living, but he had to pay the collect charges. So he was writing to them saying, you know, I had to pay, and it was a little bit broken, whatever. So I think they reimbursed him his 43 cents or something.
Yep.
Anyway, so, and then we also found out other stuff. Like I found out my grandpa who was the one that had moved from Japan, he was 55 years old when he was evacuated. So that's, you know, a terrible, well, just, you know, it would have been a bad time when you're that old, that age, right? I don't mean old.
Okay.
That age, not like, I mean, my mom was traumatized, but not like she was in her young 20s or whatever, but he must have been. And my aunt
Start
found
over,
out,
yeah.
yeah, she's nearly 93 now. She had never known her own grandparents' names. So she found that out in here, and it had, yeah, the name of her dad's.
Maternal.
Yeah, my mom's, yeah, the Okuma
Yeah.
side. So, and it's still interesting, on my dad's side, the Kagawa side, they never kept in touch, and it never did say the parents' names. Like I could never find records of who not the parents, not the ones that came to Canada, but the ones that stayed in Japan. And even on those records, it didn't say their name, just said deceased. So kind of too bad. Anyways,
Thank you.
all the cousins and family who saw things, and not everyone has taken a look, I guess, they really thought it was wonderful to be able to access these records easily like that. Very, very good database. Thank you for your work on it.
Oh, thank you for the feedback. And just before I turn it over to some questions, since I have this out here, a few things about Kayla Isomura. I pulled the grandmother Fusa, or great grandmother perhaps. She was a dressmaker, and they had a shop underneath where they lived. There's the landlady's name, landlord's name, and at the bottom there's a personal property, Singer sewing machine. But this is interesting. They had a black Airedale dog. We'll take dog to Greenwood if possible. If not, we'll phone the SPCA. And here they have $10 war savings certificates in name of sons, Hide and Toshio, in mother's possession. So some people, Brad Ackroyd, his first impression, he came back, was saying, oh, the irony of that they bought these victory bonds, and we see them a lot. And here is some correspondence about her trying to ship her sewing machine to Greenwood, and the office would pay the cartage and the freight, but they would have to pay for storage and crating if there's any expense for crating. So little things that would jump out at people as they read these files, depending on how well they know their ancestors. So are there any questions out there? I think we have just
yeah, we've got on the chat. So there's a couple of questions about the actual database. Will it be linked to Densho? Can it be connected to ancestry.com? And wanting to know where they can access the web address for the database.
Well, we'll be definitely announcing and sharing how to access it when it's available, whether through our newsletter or through our through Nikkei Voice, through Bulletin, through our e-blast that we do, and throughout we'll be doing public outreach, whether it's virtual or hopefully we'll be able to get out and about around the country doing some demonstrations and things. We don't have, that's a great point. We have talked to Densho in the past, but we haven't talked about linking or somehow combining, consolidating with Densho, or who was the other?
Ancestry.com.
Oh, Ancestry.com. No, not at this point, but great suggestions. Something for Landscapes 2.0, perhaps.
Yes, definitely. And the National Association of Japanese Canadians will also, if you sign up for our e-news, we will also share the information with Landscapes of Injustice in the database when it's launched. There's a question about, will the traveling exhibit be available to other museums in or after the locations in BC?
Say that, sorry, I shouldn't have been reading these.
Oh, sorry.
I wasn't paying
The
attention.
traveling exhibit
Yes.
will the traveling exhibit be available to other museums?
Yes.
Or after the locations in BC?
Well, even within those time frames, we are looking. We're actively going out. It was intentionally, there were gaps so that we could sell it. It is a traveling exhibit, and even with today's climate, I think it's even better where there's it's more portable, and there'll be digital components to it. So if you have any leads, we did talk to people at in Galt and Galt Museum, and when we were out in Lethbridge, and then down in San Francisco. At the very beginning in 2015, Jordan and I went on an exploratory, and we do in principle have an agreement with the Yokohama Migration Museum, a Japanese migration museum in Yokohama. But again, we have to see how things go. But even after we finish our tour, it'll be housed at the Nikkei National Museum, and I'm sure there'll be opportunities to send it out to other places.
Great. A lot of comments about acknowledging and thanking for the acknowledgement of the emotional aspect and the impact of connecting with these historical documents. So agreeing that there should be people to be present for workshops to deal with the historical trauma, and definitely comments about, I'm glad I'm not the only one that gets emotional angry about this. A question about the records. How complete are the records reviewed in each selected location in BC? I'm specifically interested in records associated with Steveston.
Well, when we first started the project, we had 4 study sites, and Steveston was one of them. So we went through the land titles. That's something I didn't even go into. Maybe it's the next series that we do, land titles. But we did land titles on Salt Spring Island, in portion of Haney, and all of Powell Street, 24 blocks, and then Steveston. But the thing with Steveston was not all of them were property owners. So some were renting, some were living in canneries. But we should have fair amount of information on the Steveston area. The case files, because we have them all, anybody who was registered has his registration number will have a file number. And oftentimes even children like who are 6, 10 during under 16, they'll have an index card. They may not have a separate file. They'll usually fall under their parents, but it's kind of cool to see an index card for your dad or something.
Great, thank you. So one of the questions is, let's just move this out of the way. One of the questions is about the taping. So we mentioned that this session is being recorded. So you should be able to see the slide I've put up. If you go to, it won't be, we're recording now, so it won't be up there right now, but if you go to the najc.ca website, and specifically there is the online programs category / online programs, but you can just go to the website and find the recording. So we will have the recording there. It'll be open to everyone. Also subscribe to our NAJC e-news. So it's najc.ca/subscribe. And then you will get information about our own online programming. And as I mentioned, if anyone wants to redo this session, we are doing it May 31st. And if you go to the NAJC website, there's the link where you can pre-register for that session. And also it's on Facebook too. So you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Thank you. So,
and our storytellers, we'll have some different storytellers, David Iwasa, yes. Kate Michi Edinger, Stacy Inoue, Reiko Pla.
So yeah, so if you want to join in, there will be different stories on the Sunday session. So a lot of thank yous to Laura. Question about Ms. Kagawa's memoirs of her parents. Is it for sale? Oh, and then
it can be, and I said I'll let Mike know.
Oh, sorry. There, yeah, Patty's commented. Thanks, Patty. Question about, will the exhibit come to Alberta? At one time, the 3rd largest group of Japanese Canadians lived in southern Alberta.
Yeah.
Many would be interested in seeing the traveling exhibit.
Yeah, we've been looking at Alberta. It's definitely there's definitely a gap there, and
Oh, and then we're getting Hamilton. So everybody's hands going up now. Vernon. Somebody that's on the board for the Greater Vernon Museum and Archives. Hamilton, so I'm quite sure there's a lot
Yeah,
of.
and I think, and so we got extra an additional funding to help the development of the museum, and there is a possibility that there is a sort of a even more portable one from the traveling exhibit that could go around to community centers and cultural centers and universities as well. But I really am keen on being in Lethbridge with the Lethbridge Sugar Beet bus tour and going to the Galt Museum. I thought that would be a really good fit.
Some
As
definitely
well as maybe University of Alberta or down in Calgary. So it could do a smaller swing through or a bigger swing through Alberta.
Yep, some great tie-ins. So a question about the database. Is it possible to search by children's names, or does it have to be their parents?
No, children should come up. That's a good question. Definitely if they have a card, and a lot of them you'll find do have cards. They just don't have that. But once you get a card, you can find others, because you usually say their name and then their mother's and their registration number or their file number. And when we go and search these index cards, a lot of them, as Stacy will know, a lot of them they're very hard to see. But by doing a little detective work, we go, oh, this person has the same registration, father's registration as this one. What's this number over here? And then you just pull those files and you find, and they all go together. Or you see it, just the address is the same, and you, oh, that's the same family. So I believe, yeah, you will be able to do the children's name, but usually all you need is a grandfather's sort of, or grandmother's maiden name or something, and you'll be able to kind of track down from there. Because once you get one of these information from RCMP or one of those other information cards, you'll see a fair amount of information on it. For example, this guy was single. So here, wife's name, Tsuruyo, and there is file 3658, registration 06807. And then you've got the children, Sochi, Hide, and Toshio. So Toshio might have an index card, but would be under her Fusa's number, file number. But you do a search and Toshio would come up. Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Great. And we've got hang on, Caitlin Finley's on the,
hey,
Landscapes of Injustice. So she says the research associates are listing the names of children in the metadata for the case files.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you, Caitlin.
Awesome.
Yes, and I think we've got one of our participants who is, she says she's found her grandfather's memoirs that he wrote while he and grandma were in the camp. So wondering if that's worth contributing. So I've got one comment going, Leah, please contribute.
Yes, and a lot of this is people are going through their photos and their family documents. Think Nikkei National Museum. They will professionally archive them. It's a win-win for everybody.
Yes. So definitely they're interested in stories and artifacts. So I know we're just a minute over the hour. So thank you for hanging in there. Wanted to get through all these questions.
Everyone.
And thank you so much for Mike Abe for the wonderful work he's doing, but also coming tonight and sharing the presentation. And as I said, we are repeating the session May 31st with a new group of family stories to share. So for anyone that wants to join in again or tell your family or friends, please join us. Thank you so much on behalf of the National Association of Japanese Canadians, and as please connect najc.ca, sign up for e-news and find out about our online programming. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.